The translation of a logical memory address to the physical address lines between the DDR controller and the DDR memory module, or chip, is dependent on several factors. These include the configuration and architecture of the DDR memory, the organization of the memory, and the mapping strategy used by the controller. To determine how a given logical address maps to the address lines, consider the following general steps. Determine the DDR configuration. Look at the datasheet for your DDR memory module chip to determine the configuration. DDR memories are usually described with a configuration like 512 MX8, 512 meg locations 8 bits wide, or 256 MEX16, etc. Understand row, column, and bank addressing. DDR memories are typically organized in rows, columns, and sometimes banks. A memory access involves selecting a particular row, column, and possibly a bank. The datasheet will specify the number of row address lines, RAS, and column address lines, CAS. If the memory has multiple banks, there will also be bank address lines. Map logical address to physical address lines. The lowest order bits of the logical address typically map to the column address. The next set of bits will typically map to the row address. If the DDR has multiple banks, some of the address bits will be used for bank selection. As an example, for a memory with a configuration that has 1024 rows, 1024 columns, and 8 banks, the lowest 10 bits of the logical address would map to the column address, because 2 circumflex 10 equals sign 1024. The next 10 bits would map to the row address. The next 3 bits would map to the bank address, because 2 circumflex 3 equals sign 8. Consider address multiplexing. DDR memories often use multiplexing to reduce the total number of pins required for addressing. This means that the same physical address line might be used for both row and column addressing, but at different times. The datasheet and the controller's configuration will provide information on how this multiplexing is handled. Controller mapping strategy. The DDR controller may have its own mapping strategy that determines how logical addresses map to physical address lines. For instance, controllers might use techniques like bank interleaving to improve memory access performance. Refer to the documentation for your specific DDR controller to understand its mapping strategy. Burst accesses. When accessing DDR memory, data is often read or written in bursts. Ensure you consider how the logical address changes during burst accesses. Consider additional bits. DDR memory modules may also have additional address bits for features like chip selects if there are multiple memory chips modules being accessed by a single controller. Finally, always use the datasheets and documentation for both the DDR memory module chip and the DDR controller as the primary reference when determining how logical addresses map to physical address lines. The detailed mapping specifics can vary based on the DDR version, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4, etc., manufacturer, and even specific part numbers.